Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news. The Bloomberg Businessweek podcast with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec from Bloomberg Radio.
Pretty lights, anyone for tennis, wouldn't that be nice?
All right, everybody. I got to say, when we think about the U.S. Open, there are players that you know, there are players, legends that are not here this year. There are also players that are up and coming, maybe not household names, but will be. Someone who knows them all, has written about them, continues to, is Jon Wertheim. He's executive editor, senior writer at Sports Illustrated, correspondent for the Tennis Channel. So this is a big-time working event for him. He is covering the U.S. Open for the Tennis Channel. He's also contributing correspondent for 60 Minutes. He's a busy dude, and he found some time once again to join us here on site at the U.S. Open. How are you?
Good. Pleasure to be here. Nice to see you guys. How are you doing? Good week of tennis, right?
It's great. It got a little cooler.
Yeah,
We're kind of loving that. Coverage. What are you loving about it this year? What's interesting for you?
Oh man. Tennis is this weird point where Roger Federer's retired. Mm-hmm. Titan player. Everyone loved him. Not here. Serena Williams, Titan, not here. Rafa Nadal, not here. And I think everybody worried, oh man, after these legends retire, what does tennis look like? Is anyone going to care about the sport? And we've kind of made an uncharacteristically great, graceful pivot for tennis. And the grounds are more full than ever. The attendance is through the roof. It's going to set a record. And it's kind of strange because we have this deficit of stars compared to what we used to have. So that's a story I'm looking at.
So do we have the deficit of stars, or is Coco Gauff going to be there? Is Shelton going to be there? Is Alcaraz there?
Alcaraz could have been there.
Yeah,
alas, he's
last
not.
night.
Alas, he's not in the tournament. I think they're bright prospects. I think they're fans. They're players that fans are starting to build relationships with. But we're not talking about guys. 20 majors.
Yeah.
Coco Gauff's wonderful, but just one. And I kind of feel like fans kind of like the unpredictability of it all. And they don't mind that any of 20 players could win. And they don't mind that Carlos Alcaraz wins 2 tournaments and then loses in the second round here.
So in a sense, is that better for the sport?
It's funny because I think the conventional wisdom is you sort of need excellence at the top. But the NFL, which is the most successful sports league certainly in the U.S., has this any given Sunday theory, and parity is great. And we want all fans to think their team could get to the Super Bowl. It's kind of worked out for them, and I think tennis is sort of pleasantly surprised how well things are going in the absence of stars.
Why do you think it is that way? We've been talking with various folks from the USTA, and they talk about the Zendaya movie, Challengers, and how much money it made. And I know you're rolling your eyes.
I didn't see it, actually. I didn't even.
I haven't seen it.
Zendaya's rate is quite high, so I don't know how much it actually made. But no, I think you're right. I think tennis is having a bit of a moment, and I think instead of tethering itself to these stars, Serena Williams, Roger Federer, Rafa Nadal, it's about the culture, it's about the fashion, it's about the international aspects. I think some of it too is just you and I could be playing, and it would still be fun to come to the U.S. Open and watch a tennis match.
Yeah.
This is such a big event. It's almost sort of
actually,
not
John, if you and I were
player-dependent.
if I was playing, no, it wouldn't be.
But they would have honeydeuces, and they would have music, and it's almost sort of they're not player dependent here the way they used to be. No, I think there's a lot to recommend about tennis. I have pet theories about. I think pickleball may be a bit of a help, that all millions of people are now sort of understanding what it means to hit a slice, or they have a more appreciation for tennis because they've been bopping around a wiffle ball in their yard. So
our producer Sebastian and I were watching a match on the side courts here yesterday, and we were sitting next to somebody, and he was talking about his pickleball, playing pickleball.
It's a thing, but I think that translates to tennis.
Yeah.
No, it's just strange. Tennis is sort of having this moment, and whether it's Zendaya in movies or it's the attendance. I don't think anyone saw this coming. I think there was a lot of hand-wringing about what would the sport look like. It's sort of a happy surprise.
Yeah, it's been really awesome to watch and at least be able to cover it over the last few years, and even in that little bit of time, see the growth. Any big stories so far this year at the U.S. Open that are sticking out to you?
Well, I think sometimes there are big stories in week one, and that's you've got either controversy or you have big upsets, and then it kind of leads to a little bit of a fizzle in week 2. I mean, this year we've had some upsets. I mean, Carlos Alcaraz losing is obviously a big story, and I think a lot of people are sort of perplexed. This is supposed to be the new star. He won the French Open. He won Wimbledon. And everyone thought, could he pull the summer triple? I mean, not even Roger Federer, not even Novak Djokovic ever did that. And then he comes out here and he loses in the second round to a guy outside the top 50. That's been a strange story. I think, we've had sort of the usual, the celebrities, and Aaron Judge was here, and Karen Washington. I mean, there hasn't been sort of that huge controversy, which I suspect the USTA doesn't mind. We had the longest match in U.S. Open history a few days ago, which was good fun. But I think, sometimes week 1 and excitement and upsets sort of doesn't pay off in week 2. So I think we're in a nice place right now on First Friday as we make this turn.
How many Opens have you covered?
Oh,
I'm not trying
we were doing so well, and now you've got to. It's really depressing. A lot. I mean, like since the '90s. Remember the '90s?
I do remember actually the '90s.
But that was a really important era for American men's tennis.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of caught the very, very tail end of Sampras Agassi, and then I sort of came up. I came up with I had anything to do with it.
I mentioned McEnroe and Connors before, and they all looked at me like I was evil. I know. You got to know.
Pre-90s.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just funny because the game sort of takes on different identities, and it was Sampras Agassi, and then you had the Williams sisters, and you sort of had this international. I mean, I was here when Andy Roddick won, and you said, there's this fresh American champion, and then here comes Roger Federer, Rafa Nadal, and Novak Djokovic that basically ate everyone else lunch for 20 years. And now we're at this sort of, I mean, obviously Djokovic is still here. He's the defending champion. He's 37 years old. I would say, do you guys remember, just sidebar, remember when Jimmy Connors had that crazy run in 1991? He's 39 years old, and it was sort of, it's everybody drinking their Geritol, and there were a lot of jokes, and he's going to have to go to bed early, and someone's going to have to chop up his steak into bite-sized pieces.
Oh, my God.
Djokovic is only like 18 months younger, and we haven't mentioned his age once. He's just a contender to win the title again.
Look how far we've come.
So look how far we've come.
But you know
exactly.
what? Think about that just coming off the Olympics. I was a gymnast as a young kid. And, I mean, to look at Simone Biles, right? And normally you have a good season maybe. You're really young. But look at, I just think is there something happening in sports where, people can go the distance, and why not?
I have two theories. You want them real quick?
Yeah.
One of them is just
we
sort
got
of
time,
it's
so
evolution, it's sports science. I also think it's appropriate for a Bloomberg audience.
Tom Brady.
It's commerce. It's money. I mean, these players have. I mean, Billie Jean King used to come in the back of a station wagon. Now you've got players. They've got their own masseuses. They've got their own teams. They're not standing in line waiting for the Hertz rental car counter to.
Oh, they're getting here on private jets.
Exactly, and I think that has the extension. It's a career extender.
Partly because they have deals with private jet companies.
Well, that too. It doesn't hurt when you have that endorsement.
But if they didn't play well, I mean, they're playing well though.
Yeah. Sports science, they can avail themselves to all of the cold plunges and the trainers and the physios and is Tom Brady similar? And I think LeBron James is still going strong and 20 years into this career, and I think it's because they can afford career extension.
This one's done a cold plunge, by the way.
I did. Yeah,
very popular. Right?
They're very popular. I mean, who knows what the science is, but this might be a good time to talk doping. Might be.
All right.
What's the deal?
I don't
know. In
this
sport.
I mean, you want my honest opinion?
Yeah,
I believe that incentives explain an awful lot of human behavior. And I get why some athletes will dope. I get why some athletes who might be trying to, have this career resurgence late in their career would dope. I can see how young athletes. I don't think. I mean, obviously, we're talking about Yannick Sinner, number one seed, eve of the tournament, and we have this sort of strange story where he had failed 2 doping tests from about 5 months ago, but was essentially exonerated, found no negligence, no fault, because the trainer essentially was careless and used a substance that was legal in Italy, but is on the banned list. And I get the skepticism. I understand sort of there are a lot of players who are very suspicious about this. I always look at incentives. Why would a guy with a $150 million Nike deal starting his career in March when there are no major tournaments for months and months, the amount was so minuscule it wouldn't enhance performance. It just doesn't make sense that he would intentionally dope. That may sound naive. I think it's naive to say there's no doping in tennis, but I also think it's such a sport that depends on hand-eye coordination and focus and mental toughness. It's not as though putting on 5 pounds of muscle is really where the action is. I think the doping probably might help with recovery and with some of the cardio. Again, I don't think it's 100% clean. I don't think any sport is, but in this case, the facts of the case, the process is disturbing. It's very strange. Usually you hear about this right away. Usually there's a strict liability standard where, hey, we don't care what happened. It's in your system. You're the CEO of your system.
Right.
You're guilty. That wasn't the case. I mean, I think there are a lot of process questions.
Does that give you pause, the lack of process questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way this handled, people are going to have to go back and really pick this apart and figure out why it was that this guy played for 5.5 months, which is very rare in tennis. Usually, mention why wasn't there the publicity that usually accompanies some of these announcements? There are a lot of players saying, boy, I wish, I tested positive too, and I also was eventually exonerated, but I had to take the reputational hit. Yeah. Or I couldn't play. So I think the way this was handled raises a lot of questions, but everyone's speculating. I just don't think he does.
Your point about incentives is really interesting because I didn't think you were going to go
I
that way.
thought you were going to go to money.
Exactly. I thought you were going the other way. And I come from the world of cycling where, doping is and has been rampant for years. And, a tenth of a second or that much more power is what ends up mattering in the end of a race. And the idea when you said incentives, I thought, incentives to win. But no, you're saying that there's too much to lose for these players.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you think about how much of these players' income and net worth have nothing to do with prize money. It's image, it's reputation, it's what they represent, it's how they carry themselves. You are jeopardizing all of that to win a couple of tennis matches in Indian Wells, California in March. I don't want to be naive here. Everyone's one thing that's interesting about this to me is that some very credible, very knowledgeable, very reasonable former players agree with me and sort of say it doesn't make sense. The amount was so minuscule. Very credible, very reasonable, very educated former players say something's really fishy here. The amount might just be that he was cycling off of it. Don't be seduced by sort of the fractional, the sort of infinitesimally small amount. Don't be naive. And the guy got caught twice. What more do you need? So even within tennis, even in the sort of inner sanctum, there are very divergent opinions. I just think you get to a point with your reputation and your net worth and how much sponsorship you have. I mean, these players can make $4 or $5 million for being a worldwide brand ambassador. That's more than the U.S. Open champion will make.
Right.
Why would you jeopardize that in March?
Yeah,
over this this vanishingly small amount of banned substance.
Although we see in our world very wealthy people, financiers who have tons of money and yet do something that breaks the law just to get a little bit more money.
Right.
And you think, really? Why did you do that? But I hear what you say.
Yeah. No, it's a fair point. I mean, the risk-reward calculus is not always, so calibrated.
From our perspective,
exactly.
Could it have been the do you blame the coach?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of where this falls, is essentially the trainer. And again, the substance it's legal in Italy, but on the box it says doping. Yeah. So I'm not sure where. And I mean, someone else said, listen, your job as a trainer, one of your big jobs is you
put it down, move it, actually get it away from me.
But you know what? Aspirin works pretty well too. I mean, there are alternatives. But bacitracin will cover that that cut as well. It was a really strange set of circumstances. And someone said, look, if you're a trainer, your number one job basically is to get anything even potentially illegal or on the ban list away from the athlete. And here's a guy putting it on his hand and then giving the athlete an ungloved massage. The flip side is, people do dumb things. I don't know. It's definitely, it's been, inside these doors where we are now, it's still a week into this tournament. Very much being discussed.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit, because we're at the Bud Collins Media Center, and you go inside here. This is where all the journalists are.
Right.
What's the vibe been like covering this with the other journalists? Is
this story in particular?
Yeah. Well, this story is still dominating?
Yeah. I mean, the players, his initial press release, and whatever. We're all familiar with press releases. I look forward to putting this issue behind me, and you want to say, that's. Oh, do you? That's not really how it works.
It's one way to keep the issue front and center.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
We know this is what you would like.
I just want to move on.
But that's,
But the other players have been really supportive of him, it sounds like. Some of them.
That's funny.
Some of them.
Yeah, I'd say it's been very guarded, actually.
You think so?
Yeah. I mean, I think given the range, sometimes sort of my guilty pleasure is UFC, is mixed martial arts.
Yeah.
There, anytime someone there's a doping violation, everybody piles on and sort of says, listen, I knew this guy was cheating. This is much more guarded, but these are sort of these very sort of meticulously worded sentences. Nobody is falling on the grenade, and a couple of former players, Nick Kyrgios is here, and he's made a number of sort of incendiary statements. It's been I've sort of been surprised at how little support he's gotten. There does seem to be real questions about the process, and everyone's got a friend, everyone's got a colleague who had a similar circumstance and didn't have the luxury of 6 or 7 figures worth of legal representation and sort of this cakewalk to sort of get this thing buried 5.5 months later.
It's kind of interesting. But it is funny when we start talking about this, and this is something we're going to do some news and come back, but I do want to also talk to you about, like, all the money in sports. Like, this has been a big week. Like, we're just talking about, private equity now being able in NFL, but I just, again, from our perspective, like, this idea of money corrupts at some point and causes us to do, I don't know, gambling. Like, this is another thing that we've been talking about. And just curious your take on, like, all the money that continues to come into sports, media rights, like all this stuff, good or bad. And we'll come back and talk some more. Is it good or bad?
Next. We'll talk when we get back.
Okay, we're going to continue. We're going to come back with Jon Wertheim. He's executive editor, senior writer of Sports Illustrated. As we said, correspondent for the Tennis Channel and 60 Minutes. We're going to talk about that in just a moment.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
We want to get back to Jon Wertheim, executive editor, senior writer over at Sports Illustrated, correspondent for 60 Minutes, also for the Tennis Channel. He is working, of course, the U.S. Open here on site with us. So the money that we continue to see in sports. It's a big thing that we cover, a vertical, certainly at Bloomberg, the business of sports. You can go a lot of different places. But this was an interesting week where the NFL said, okay, private equity, you can own a certain amount of ownership. The money that continues to come into sports, good, bad, indifferent, like, how do you feel about it? How do you think about it? Gambling, we'll talk about that too.
I think that's it. I think it depends on the source. Look, any industry, we like money coming in, and we like more investment and not less. I think sports are a pretty robust sector. I think it depends what. There's a sports washing component to this. Do we like money when it comes from the Gulf region? Well, that comes with some strings attached. Do we like money when it comes through sports gambling? And that's been a huge infusion of cash for teams and leagues and media. Not so much for athletes. We can talk about that. That's been a big topic among the players in the Players Lounge, is the sports gambling. We can talk about that. I think media money, great. If ESPN wants to re-up here, very few properties are actually going to come up for renewal anytime soon. But look, if the NBA can make $1 billion a season from its media rights deal, like, that's great, especially when there's a 50-50 split with the players. So,
right.
Yeah, I think it depends. I think, rule of thumb, commerce good, but I think it depends on the source.
Tell us about the conversations that that's being talked in terms of gambling, because they don't necessarily get a piece of it, do they?
No. In this sport, it's really problematic. In team sports, look, it's a 50-50 revenue split, right? So if the NFL does $1 billion with DraftKings, that's half of that, in theory, goes to the players. Tennis does not have revenue sharing like that. They also forbid the athletes from using the product, which is standard for most sports. And what happens in tennis is that a big gambling sport. Tennis is like the third most gambled on sport. There are millions of matches. There's inventory all over the world. It's crazy. There are 2 guys playing in a parking lot, and there are 3 fans. We're not talking about the U.S. Open here. There are all these low-level events, and there are 3 fans watching, but there are tens of thousands of dollars being wagered on this match. It is ripe for corruption, but what's really problematic to the players is that they get a lot of abuse from losing gambling. You cow, I just lost $100 because you can't hold your serve. And the players are saying, wait a second, we don't get the revenue. We can't even use the product. That's a little problematic. You guys are getting all this endorsement money, and the product itself we are forbidden from using. You guys can sell the signage, and you can get the data rights deal, which basically just means selling data to bookies. And not only do we not get any revenue, we open up our phone, and we have a stream of messages that are just the most vile thing you've ever heard from aggrieved gamblers.
Right.
This seems very problematic.
It's really problematic.
You've tweeted on this.
Yeah, it's really. Tennis needs a lot more player representation. I think it's problematic across the board for any of 100 reasons, but at least football players and basketball players are seeing some of that money. These players get all the downside. They open their phone and they get death threats because they missed a forehand, and the tournaments are the ones that can put the signage on the back wall saying, DraftKings and FanDuel.
And it's such a solitary sport, too, so it's not like a team is getting the hatred. It's this individual,
Exactly.
and everything is riding on this one individual. So what's the solution there?
I think it's naive to say, in a perfect world, maybe tennis says, listen, not for us. We're not going to give you our data. There are ways to turn off the spigot. I don't think that's realistic. A bit more revenue to the players would at least give them some skin in the game. At least they're essentially getting paid for the abuse they're taking. I also think you have to monitor this. What I can't wrap my brain around with, you guys can help me with this. I can't order an Uber and say my name is, Moscow Mule 1117.
Yeah.
I can't. The anonymity, I think, would end a lot of this. Why is it that I can send a player a death threat and bear no consequence when they lose a tennis match, but I can't go on Amazon and use a pseudonym?
There might be somebody who launches rockets you might want to talk to about this.
Oh, yeah,
who could
exactly.
answer that question.
Elon Musk.
Yeah, that's who I'm thinking
No,
of.
it's like there's a whole social
that's
media
true,
world
but
right
even-
now and
but
trying to
but
figure out the
verified-
responsibility or the
But verified
accountability.
accounts that are,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
just pay $10 a month or whatever, $8 a month, and your
Exactly.
tweets get surfaced.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter who you
And
are.
AI is probably just going to make it all worse in terms of, Gen
Well,
AI and
and
so on and so
AI,
forth.
when AI and sports gambling intersect. My issue with sports gambling right now, we are at the, remember when you had Joe Camel
Yeah.
in kids magazines,
Yeah.
and you had vending machines in
Yeah.
high school selling cigarettes.
This
and you
is
had
my era.
a smoking remember the smoking section on the airplane, as if the smoke knew when to stop.
It did.
I think
no, it didn't.
I think we're at that phase with sports gambling. We're going to look back and we're going to say, what? You were allowed to do this? The players got banned?
But isn't the
using-
cat out of the bag now? There's no...
Yeah, I think there's regulation, and I think there's some. I think whatever the cliche, toothpaste isn't going back in the tube. But I think we're going to look back at this period and say, was there no regulation whatsoever?
Would you expect at some point there's going to be some big blow up of something? Whether
That's a great point, because
I'm waiting.
I think the way the leagues, and again, this was one of the great about faces in sports. 10 years ago, the leagues would say that this is the most sinister thing, and they all, everybody went to Capitol Hill to say why PASPA, the legislation should be overturned, and why, and then the leagues essentially did an about face and said, yeah, you know what, this is a lot of revenue we're passing up, and we need sunlight, we need legal gambling is better than illegal gambling, and the one thing the league said was that the threat of corruption is going to be lessened when it's public, right? We're going to have all this data, we have all this access, it's like marijuana, it's sort of going to decriminalize it. And I think in a very short amount of time, this started out, there were a couple of college scandals, and there was a baseball coach who tipped someone off, and then now all of a sudden we have the Shohei Ohtani, the MVP,
Right,
the reigning
that's
MVP.
right.
Well, he wasn't.
Yeah.
I think it looks pretty clear. He wasn't corrupt, but someone very close to him was siphoning money out of his account to pay his debts. We have someone on the Toronto Raptors is now banned from basketball globally because of I think the water level is getting very high, and I feel like we are one Black Sox type scandal away from this thing really imploding. I think right now there are a lot of people who are wringing their hands, and it's great. We love this infusion of revenue, and some stadiums have sports books. I'm Sports Illustrated, Tennis Channel, CBS,
Yeah.
ESPN.
ESPN in Vegas, Disney in Vegas.
Every sports
would've
media, exactly.
I'm sure Mickey is not into this.
You don't think?
No.
Again, like on ESPN, you could mention point spreads a few years ago. My favorite story of all these is that the Vegas Chamber of Commerce wanted to buy a Super Bowl ad about 20 years ago, and the NFL said no because it's too adjacent to gambling.
And it was just Las Vegas.
And the Super Bowl, it was the Chamber of Commerce, exactly. And now the Super Bowl is in Las Vegas. The announcers are telling you what the point spread is, and pretty soon we're just going to go to NFL.com and bet on football games on the NFL's website. The about face on this is it's pretty dramatic.
Everybody
pretty
in the
wild.
pool,
Exactly.
like it's totally. I feel like we'd be remiss because earlier this year you did something on CBS Sunday Morning, and it was about defending Sports Illustrated, its relevance. And our producer Paul Brennan, faithful reader for 45 years, starting when he was a kid, loved the magazine version. And we were confused if there is a print version. There still is, right? What does the world lose by not having print versions?
First of all, I would say that surprisingly and against all odds, there seems to be a very happy resolution here. I did that piece for, I don't know when that was, maybe February. I did that piece for CBS Sunday Morning, and it was really a problematic time for Sports Illustrated. We sort of had this white knight, this company, Minute Media, stepped up, and we're knocking on plywood, and so far so good. It's sort of a miraculous, happy media story. I mean, to me, it's not so much the print versus digital. I mean, candidly, print is a lot. It's a smaller part of my life than it was just a few years ago. To me, it's just sort of the independence of it all, and the fact that you don't have to, it's fear and favor, and it's writing about things without a partnership with the league, and there's no conflict of interest. I mean, to me, that's what's lost with this changing media landscape. And my attitude is like, I don't care if it's TV or digital or the phone or print or whatever it is, as long as it's getting to the consumer. To me, it's just the independence, and I think that's sort of what my great fear was at the time, that this is just another media entity that's going to be swallowed up, and now everything's sort of mediated through a league, a team, an athlete themselves, which is great, but you also need some sort of objectivity. And
agreed.
Happily, Sports Illustrated, kind of sort of a comeback story in 2024, I'm happy to tell you.
Good.
Very cool.
I'm glad to hear that. I also, I love that you love Trader Joe's.
Where'd you hear that?
New York
I love
Times.
Trader Joe's.
I know. New York
Trader
Times did
Joe's.
a little. The New York Times.
I love Trader Joe's.
What's not to love?
Who doesn't
Am I allowed
love
to say
Trader
that?
Joe's?
Is that a conflict of interest? I'm an unpaid
John,
spokesman.
It's out there.
All right.
It's good stuff. Thank you so much.
Oh, pleasure.
This is a pleasure. We always feel like it's just such a smart dive.
And he's in the flesh this year.
He is
He's
in the
here.
flesh.
He's here.
Beat Zoom.
The tennis
It
channel is
does.
going to be calling like, hey.
Yeah, right. Get back to Santa Monica. No, pleasure.
No, don't. Jon Wertheim, of course, as we said, he is covering the U.S. Open for the Tennis Channel. He's executive editor, senior writer at Sports Illustrated, and, of course, correspondent for 60 Minutes.
This is the Bloomberg Businessweek podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.